Christi, strong Hispanic market, and they decided to bring in Mascaras.
Corey's the one who breaks that news to you.
Corey breaks the news, hey, and he thinks it's going to be great.
Yes.
And I'm like, oh, man, I know Mascaras is a certifiable legend, bigger star globally than I ever was. But I'd also seen him work in world class, and I felt like he wasn't a giver. You know, he was going to get into stuff. But at that point, he was older. That's all he really wanted to do. And I did not know how to have a good match with him. Like, Al Perez couldn't have a good match. Now it was a heck of a hand. So it was...
Al Perez is, for people who don't know, he's Seth Rollins' father. Illegitimately. No.
So, Spanish wrestlers, you should know, not remembrance, because that would mean that the shit passed. In recognition, in the United States, where it is Spanish American Heritage Month, and one of the greatest, probably the most renowned Mexican wrestler who really put Lucha Libre on the map would be Mils Mascaras. He is within the top 2 or 3 of all time from Mexico. But the thing I will say about Mils Mascaras is this: never anywhere in the world without billions and billions of dollars of branding has any star meant so much, no matter where he was. Okay, in the United States, he would of course draw the Mexican Americans, but it was more than that. There's always been an amazing fascination with Lucha Libre, but it's never really been delivered in a proper fashion in the United States to non-Hispanic people. And Mills, with the look and the way that he worked, and especially his ring presence, you could count on your gates being up 25%. And at the time, wrestlers were paid by how big the gate was, So you hear about the people today that you guys listen to, when Chris Jericho bashes Mills. Mick Foley, as he's getting older, he's starting to bash Mills. He was talking about how difficult he was to work with in what I just played you, which we're going to do more on. And this is Mick Foley shooting on working with Mascaras, and this was 9 years ago, okay? And the first thing I want to do is remind you guys that this is being brought to you commercial-free on YouTube. And it's a pimp. It's a pimp to get you to subscribe to PPWLive, where I'm going to really delve into, the history of the man of 1,000 masks, and probably the man of a million holds, Mils Mascaras. So, once again, I in no way, shape, or form would ever take shots at Mick Foley, because I don't care how long it has been since I've seen Mick Foley or communicated with Mick Foley or been in touch with Mick Foley. I truly love the fucking man, because he had no problem working with me when I was green as F in the industry. And then when I met up with him a couple years later down in World Class in Dallas, Texas, when I was working down there for Fritz and for Kevin, went out of his way to look out for me again. He did a personal appearance for me and waited and trusted that I would get him the money that he was promised, and he took off out the door on his own dime, which Mick does not do. And also, lastly, the fact that when he and I worked with his first big push, I want to say it was 97 for WWE and Vince, we had one hell of a match, and as a matter of fact, we ended up on the trading card for that year for Mick Foley or for Mankind, and as cool as fucking Mick was, man, I mean, he kept up on how I was doing. He didn't have to do that. And when they put me with him, it wasn't by accident, because he was just coming in and trying to get over, and they were trying to get the gimmick over. He told the office I should be putting him over, and who the F does that? But anyway, what I'm going to talk about is just some of the differences and things that Mick and I haven't seen eye to eye on in the past. And Mick would know better than me. I'm not saying that because he's actually in the ring with Mascaras, but I'm even going to bring up some things that maybe Mick should take a look at too, to understand, that, for example, this was a huge star. As far as the world went, Mill was a huge star. I've seen footage where the fans, because security couldn't control them, and they were not that reactive, folks, would literally carry him 100 yards from the locker room to the ring and set him up on the apron gently when they were all terrified, including Mills, who just didn't sell it and went along with it, One of the greatest workers of all time, and we're talking about real money-drawing fucking shooter, but also a great, intense worker. Unarguably, I don't think anybody would ever take anything away from Dick Beyer, who was Dr. X, and he loved to work with Mills Mascaras, be it mostly in Japan, but anywhere, you know what I mean? So I'm going to play some of this interview some more, and then I'm going to do like a point counterpoint for you guys for free, and then encourage you again to subscribe to PPWLive, because I'm going to make you think about things you never thought about, and you're going to hear things that you've never heard before because of the era that I come to, not because I'm so fucking great. So let's just start by saying, yes, Mick Foley says this: Mil Mascaras was a bigger star than I ever was. And we're talking about the Clash of the Champions 10 in 1988, where Mills was fucking not in his prime,
Just but he looks like him, right? Yeah. But Al was super smooth. He had a great body. Like, he was a real great technician. He wouldn't put people over, though.
Right.
And that was really, that's the silliness of not, but you're costing yourself a job because you don't want to hurt your job. So you're going to not hurt your job by losing your job,
yes,
because you won't put over the champion.
Yeah.
Now, that being said, Mills was not a guy who wanted to be tied to one company. And what was great about that is he kept himself busy for many, many years, probably longer than Mick Foley did. And I'm not saying that as a dig on Foley, because the way Foley worked, I mean, fuck, he'd be dead if he would have kept up at that pace. But the point I'm trying to make is Mills didn't care about a job because he knew that he transcended that shit. He could make a great living. He could get whatever he asked for to boost the towns, i.e., what the hell they say, Corpus Christi. There was nobody in the world at the time that could have drawn in the demographic that I'm talking about to you guys for WCW, but specifically the Mexicans, than Mills Mascaras. So yes, I mean, that's something to think about. It's like Bruiser Brody. You don't hear anybody bust on Bruiser Brody for not wanting to do the job, but Brody was out for himself, did not want to be held hostage by any promotion. You see what I'm saying? Now, it worked for Brody, and we all give him propers as performers. Why not Mil Mascaras? See what I'm saying?
Just
Dumb
to me, and especially, and I was there when guys would walk out of dressing rooms because they did 2 weeks in Japan, and they wouldn't want to lose because photographer. I lost all the time.
Well, here's the thing, okay, and I want to say this right now. In 1988, truth to the matter is, Mick was just starting to be in his prime. His TV time on WCW, he was not a top guy yet. And, what does history tell us about how big Foley was? Did you know that when Mick Foley first won the WWE Championship, the Heavyweight Championship, he didn't care what WWE said, but when I called him and said, hey, I'm thinking about starting a training school, I don't know if you're going to get heat for it, but would you sincerely consider endorsing me for training, because I don't mean shit, And you know what Mick said? That I was one of the most underrated wrestlers in the industry. I was prolific in ring skills, well-traveled, and my word was my bond, and he finished with, and also He's not a bad kisser. So the point I'm trying to make is this, okay? Mick was in a good spot, and in my mind's eye, for them to pick Mick Foley to work with Mills in that scenario was a compliment on Mick. But they weren't ready to make him the top WCW guy yet. Do you see what I'm saying?
And I did pretty well. But anyway, I knew that it was tough to have a good match, and I like to have good matches.
Now, that being said, I know people that would say that it's hard to have, during that time, that it was hard to work with Foley. Not that it was hard to work with Foley. He's such a sweetheart of a guy and such a creative storyteller. But what I'm saying is, I know some guys that like to do spot fest that would have a hard time and register that working with Foley and meeting in the middle because of the styles clashed. You know what I'm saying? What separated Mills from everybody else that warranted that tremendous fucking living and never being a slave to a territory? Well, that's in fact, on the flip side of that, Mick and Mills are a lot alike because Mick was doing things that had never been done before either. You know what I'm saying?
And my hopes were up because Mill, I think he missed his flight on purpose. If you want to catch a later flight. I was set to do a singles match with Rick Fargo, who would have gladly put me over.
Now, here's what I'm talking about. Do you want to do good business or do you want to be put over? You can do good business, you can do the job and still get over. And at the end of the day, that's what happened with Mick here. They wouldn't be talking about, to this day, Mick Foley versus Rick Fargo. They're talking about still today Mick Foley versus Mills Mascaras on Clash of the Champions 10. And like I said before, let's just go ahead and look at the record. Mick was a mid-carder and young and just getting into his prime, okay, and getting noticed. And he was held in high enough regard to go out there on this roster and let's give the people what they want, because also at the time, television ratings weren't the most important thing for WCW. Live attendance was, because that's where the money came from.
So the idea is, just to catch everybody up, you're supposed to be working Mil Mascaras. You think, or Cornette thinks when he breaks the news to you, you'd be thrilled.
Right.
But instead, when you don't get, or he doesn't get some sort of enthusiastic response, he asks, what's wrong with that? And you just cut straight to it. And you say, Mascaras sucks, and the match is going to suck. And then you ask...
No, let me say this. That being said, what we heard in the beginning is, even though Mick, and this is the Mick that is not frustrated or being caught in the politics. I'm going to say this too. In 1988, I will bet you any amount of money that Mick learned the politics at WCW during this time frame, okay, and trying to make his way up to be a household name and be all that Mick ended up being once he finally got that ball to run with it for Vince McMahon and WWE, because of his politics. Now, him saying that Mel sucked and all that, that is a frustrated Mick who is probably in the throes of those politics. Mick is in no way, at his core, disrespectful.
To explain, in my dealings, I found him to be selfish, redundant, and lousy. Those are your words in the book.
Yeah.
You're right. Jimmy, or you ask him, Jimmy, why is he coming in? And Cornette lets you know, it's just a couple shows in the Texas border towns. So
it wasn't just a couple of shows in the Texas border towns. Mick, an impeccable character in the history of pro wrestling. Unbelievably creative storyteller inside the ring and out, okay? But the point of the matter is, what ends up happening is it's very hard for wrestlers to step up and look at things from a business standpoint. I will guarantee you, in those border towns, business was up 40%. That means everybody on the card, including Mick's paycheck, was up and up big, and that's how we got paid in '88.
it does feel like as much as he's helped you out, he occasionally has given you some bad news, and this maybe
he was sometimes the bearer of bad news.
Yeah.
So I'm like
I must point out too, and I'm going to go ahead and put this link on the YouTube description. Mick's fucking smiling here, so you can see the water under the bridge.
That's great to try to increase the crowd a little bit, but in the end.
Once again, not just a little bit, my friends. I bet you it was 40% in Corpus Christi, depending on how long it had been since they'd seen Mills.
You're taking a guy who you're trying to push, having him lose to someone who's not going to be on again, somewhat akin to what I saw as a short-sightedness of making the Omni in Atlanta.
Now, someone you're trying to push, they were thinking about pushing Mick, but there was politics involved. You see what I'm saying? And at the end of the day, it was a match that people are still talking about. And I'm going to go ahead and close it here so I don't give you guys the cow for free, so you don't buy milk at PPWLive to hear the rest of this, because I'm going to dip into the history of Mills, but I'm also going to dip into what Dick Byers said about Mills and also Jericho. And I'm just going to quid pro quo that shit, because there's a lot to think about. And once again, Mills Mascaras, a WWE Hall of Famer when everything is said and done, draws a roadmap. He was so over he could make his own fucking rules, and i.e., don't forget, none of the boys have anything bad to say about Bruiser Brody, who was of the same mindset. They're drawing you a roadmap if you can be that fucking good. So go ahead, guys, take a look in the description. You're going to see how you can get more, on this guy. I've got some input that I don't think anybody does this doing wrestling podcasts now. With my 36 years of experience in, the wrestling industry. Take a look at our shop, Premier Pro Wrestling at Pro Wrestling Tees. And also, man, check out the PPWLive. I bet you we've got more wrestling content than most of them out there that you might be subscribing to. And there's other ways to follow us and all that stuff. And I want you to know this too. Why would I start to try to put myself over now at this stage of the game at 58? I'm not. I'm trying to put over our talent roster and our training, Premier Pro Wrestling training. All right, guys, thanks a lot, and the rest is going to be available at PPWLive. I encourage you to check this shit out. You will be entertained.
Now,